Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So I want to welcome everybody to our Hidden Gems webinar. We tend to like to go through some of those lesser known features and pieces of functionality in GP, so hopefully this will be useful to everybody. My name is Melissa. I think most of you probably know me, but just a little bit of a background. I am the Director of Customer Success here at Njevity, so I'm typically involved in all of our GP-related activities, whether that's new implementation, it's support, it's upgrades, all the fun stuff that we as partners tend to do around GP. I've been doing that for about the last 20 years, so it's been a long time, but I certainly love it. And then a little bit about Njevity. We are what we consider ourselves as GP experts. GP is our bread and butter, I guess you could say, and not only with our professional services and our own customers, but we also then provide cloud services for GP, both public and private, to the entire GP community. So we do work with a lot of partners to provide that activity as well. We're closing in on I think we're probably over 3,000 users at the moment, but we do have quite a few of them that we are managing and supporting and helping every day. Those are both customers and partners. And of course, I like to start with our mission statement because at Njevity, that's always important to us. And that is to improve the life and success of our partners and customers by providing exceptional business application experiences that simplify, inform, and delight. So that is certainly something that we try to make sure we do every day. So a few things that I am going to go ahead and go through today are in terms of revenue expense deferral. That's going to include the setup, transaction processing, and reporting. So we're going to go ahead and go through those things. I'm actually just going to jump right in just to be sure. Let me make sure I've got everything. It doesn't look like my screen is showing, is it? Why is my screen not showing? All right, hang on for just a minute. All right, so now you can actually see my screen. Okay, so I'm not going to be showing all of the revenue and expense deferral from right within the web client. So I'm actually using one of our Power GP Online tenants. None of this is any different, right? Because at the end of the day, web client's just like the regular desktop client that we all know and love. But I'm going to go ahead and be showing you a lot of this from within the web client. Please do, if you have questions, and I think a couple of you probably noted that my screen wasn't showing it, so I appreciate that. But if you do have questions, go ahead and post them. I've got another team member, Brandon, online with me, and he's going to be making sure that I remember to look at those questions, but please go ahead and get them posted, and we'll certainly talk about those. All right, so I am starting in my financial area page. I'm actually just in the setup, so I'm going to talk through some of the options, both with just the deferral module setup and then creating some profiles. So in the deferral setup, which is really just like any other setup within Dynamics GP, we've got lots of different options. Okay, the first one that you probably really want to think about is how do I want to spread this deferral across whatever time period that I've set up. A lot of times, depending on what it is, most people are just going to say equal per period, right? So that just means if I've got a deferral that's going to be spread across the calendar year, maybe I just want an equal amount in each month. Completely okay, and I think that makes a lot of sense. There could always be things that where maybe February gets a lesser amount than January just because there's less days. So depending on what that might be for, that could potentially be a function that you want to go ahead and use. I tend to like them to be equal per period. Could just because I'm anal, but I think most things tend to fit into that type of scenario. Some of the options that we have that are down below, automatically posting through the GL, very similar to when you're seeing those posting setups in, for your entire company, what things do we want to post to and what things do we want to post through. So this is really just going to be, yes, it's either going to post all the way through, which I tend to like, but again, it could depend on some of the other options that you're choosing. Some people still like to have them stop in the GL for another review. or a little more control over how they're posting, and that's completely okay. When you're posting some of these deferrals, do you want them to go to a closed future period, right? So if I'm in January and I'm one of those users that I only have January open, but I close posting for all of my future months. However, for deferrals, maybe I want those to post so that I don't have to remember to post those each and every month. I can still have those go out to a future period. I can do the same things into previously closed periods. Now, this for me gets me a little bit more worried. I'm not super excited about having something close back into a closed period simply due to financial statement that I may have already dispersed to people. So I don't want those to change. So these I've actually, and this is preference, I've actually chosen to not let it do that. So what's going to happen, even though I'm telling it to automatically post through, but I say I don't want you to close back to a closed period, it's going to just stop at the GL with a batch so that I have to do something with it. The method for posting. So what is this actually going to do? Am I using the balance sheet or P&L? I have tended to always see that these make more sense when it is the balance sheet method. So what does that really mean? That means that my deferral, whether that's my revenue or my expense, is going to initially go into a liability account, right? So let's say for me, we do subscription billing. I was to do subscription billing and I'm billing up front for the full year, which some systems, actually some of those ERPs out there do. We do not, we do monthly, but if I did these at the beginning of the year and said, you're going to owe me this for the entire calendar year of 2019, what I actually am going to have it do is instead of it going into a revenue account that hits all in January, it's actually going to hit a liability account and say, I'm going to, because I owe this service still, I haven't earned this revenue. So I'm going to have it actually hit a balance sheet liability account, and then my recognition and how I set up the profile is going to go ahead and spread that across each month. Same thing on the purchasing side. Let's say, as a for instance, I pay my rent all in January for the entire year. Well, I don't want that expense to just hit all in January because it's not actually a valid expense for January. It's really something that should be hitting every month. So I tend to do those on the balance sheet method. The P&L method I actually don't see a lot. I have not played with it a lot. So when we walk through this today, we're going to be looking at it from a balance sheet perspective. Okay. If I void the deferral transaction, meaning I have the original transaction in the receivables or payables module or SOP or PO, wherever it originated, if I void that transaction, do I also want all of those deferral entries to be voided as well? Okay. For me, I would say yes, because if any user out there is like me, I am going to forget that. I am going to forget to put in or forget to go to future periods or previous periods and get those things voided. You can turn it off and say no. You just need to make sure that and be aware that you're going to have to do some manual adjustments very likely. And then I've got the option for user access to deferrals, right? I may have certain deferral profiles that I'm going to set up that I don't want certain people to have access to. That's completely okay. I have set this to yes. This is just from an ease of demoing the options in here. I've set it to yes, meaning any user that logs into this company can access any of the deferral profiles that I have set up. Now I have a whole, one set up, which is okay. It might be the only thing your customer needs, but I'm going to give everybody access to do that to make sure that if they have a transaction that needs to use it, they don't have to worry about getting help or having to have somebody else do it. If I choose no, there is a deferral, there is a setup screen you can go to give people access to certain ones. Okay. Do I want people to be able to override a distribution account? Okay, I have set this to never allow override, and the reason for that is because my deferral profile, and we're going to walk into that in just a minute, is telling me what accounts I'm using for this particular type of deferral. So I don't want people changing it and say, oh no, this shouldn't hit a liability account, this maybe should hit some sort of expense account. That's not the case, so we want to be very careful. And then of course, posting options. I tend to have everything go to the screen. for me, it's just easier. I like to actually see the report and then choose to print it. So I've gone ahead and do that. And then of course we've got warning options. Do you want to give warnings for certain areas, right? And it's going to go by module. Then it's going to also ask you based on the distribution type, right? Now we don't see this very often where the system gets down to the level of the distribution type, because most people don't even look at those or change them. But the deferral warnings do let you know based on certain distribution types per module, okay? I have actually left all of these off for now, just because it's a little bit easier. All right, so that's the basic setup. Any, Lisa already, see, I knew somebody was going to tell me to share my screen. So no questions so far. Anybody have, or are there any in terms of the initial setup of it? It's very similar to the setup of other modules, but just in case anybody's got some questions. Nothing yet? All right. Well, Brandon's going to keep an eye on it and let me know just in case. So we'll go ahead and save that just in case I made some changes. So now what we're going to take a look at, so I've set up the module, but I don't necessarily have any profiles yet, right? So I don't want to enter any transactions that need to have these deferrals just yet. So I'm going to go ahead into my deferral profiles, okay? Again, I give it a name. It comes with one that's called standard. Doesn't have anything set up yet, but it's a good one to start with. I just created one called demo. So we're going to take a look at that one, okay? And you'll notice I've got, when I open this, I've got receivables management highlighted. What does that mean? That just means that this one is going to be effective and available for me to choose if I'm in the receivables management module. So if I'm trying to use this one from the general ledger, I'm not going to want to do that. And why is that? Well, you'll notice that not only do I have the module selected, but I'm going to come down here. Again, this is all driven based on distribution type. And you'll notice I'm telling it to look at the sales distribution line. So what this means is when I create a receivables management invoice and I have an amount on the sales line, that's when it's going to know that's the amount that has to get deferred based on my setup. So I'm telling it to do a calculation that's equal per period. I'm starting it actually as of 1/1. I'm going to pretend I was late to get my transactions in, and these should have started at the beginning of the year. I've also left the number of periods at 0. What that means is I have to tell the system when I say, oh, this transaction is for this deferral profile, I have to tell it how many periods. So in the event I have this same scenario, but sometimes it's a 12-month, sometimes it's 24-month, I don't have to set up 2 different profiles. I'm going to put it on the transaction, okay? Now, when I enter my transaction, I need to tell it it's going to use this deferred revenue account, okay? When I am excuse me, when I'm actually having the deferral posted per month, it's going to move it from my deferred revenue, because this is my liability, and it's going to move it into my sales account. So it's going to do that based on how many how many periods I've told it to spread that that revenue across. Okay, so those are the 2 accounts that it's going to use. If I don't use this 24,000 account and I try to use this deferral, it's going to give me a warning. It's going to say, hey, I can't do that. You're not using the right account numbers. And I'll put a transaction in so you actually see that, so that the transaction's not using this account and what type of message that it gives. And then, of course, I've got user access, right? This is what we had seen on the previous screen, where I could come in and say, based on the user or the user class, I know a lot of us don't use those anymore, but they're still certainly beneficial. I can say for this profile name, I can give certain users access to do specific tasks, okay? So for me, I went ahead and gave myself access just so you could see what this setup looks like. I'm allowed to access I'm allowed to gain access to the profile, meaning I can use it. I can also make it my default if I so choose. And of course, I've let myself override everything because I'm an admin, so I do whatever I want. But you can verify what types of things they can do. Maybe you only want them changing things for the start date and number of periods. That's the only thing that your user should have access to in terms of this particular profile. You can certainly give them access only to override those. But again, by default, I have everybody with access to everything in my environment, so it doesn't necessarily matter. Now, one of the interesting things you'll notice, I'm going to save this one, and I'm going to actually just pull up, I'll just pretend we're creating a new one really quick. If you'll notice, you're going to notice some information over here changing, right? If I choose general ledger, okay, I've got recognition account, I have deferral account. I don't have any distribution types, right? Because you don't have a distribution type when you're doing a GL entry. You have debits and credits, and that's it. But if I choose payables, oops, so you have to uncheck the first one, sorry about that. You'll notice my information changes, and it's also telling you what type of, if it's going to be a debit or a credit. So it's giving you some little hints as to what type of account you're going to use. But with payables, it also then says, oh, okay, and then which of the distribution types is this going to be done on? Usually it's going to be on the purchases account, right? Because that's where my expenses are hitting. So dependent on which module you're in, I could choose sales order processing, billing recognition comes up, and again, I get the same type of things that we were looking at with the one I had set up for receivables management. All right, so I'm going to clear that. So that's setting up the actual profile. Any questions in terms of the specific profile? I'll give everybody just a minute, just in case they are typing. No, okay. So those are the two screens to actually set up the deferral modules to be able to use, whether it's payables or receivables, SOP or POP, etc. Okay, now what I have the ability to do is to actually enter some transactions. Okay, so we're gonna, oh, I got a question. Let me take a look really quick. If I can make one profile work for more than one module. Good question, Amber. Let's look. I'm going to pull up mine, select it. So if I, and here, I'm initially thinking the answer is going to be no, and here's why. So if I highlight receivables and maybe SOP, right? Okay, I could use it in both of those. Here's why. It does the same type of transaction, right? They both have a billing recognition and they both have the same distribution type. What you don't want it to do, as I say, use the same one for receivables and payables because the distribution types are different and the journal entries are going to be different. So you want to be a little bit careful about that, but you can absolutely use it as long as it's the same receivables. You know, since SOP and receivables are technically the same, one's just got more detail, you could use it for both of those. So good question. And I had not tried that, so it's always fun to try it when you're doing a live webinar. All right, so we're going to go ahead and save that. Okay, so I am going to jump into the sales module, and I'm going to do this the easy way, so we don't have to worry about line items and do I have, you know, price levels set up and all that fun stuff. So we're just going to do a simple receivables management transaction, okay, because that's super easy for us all to do. So I'm going to go ahead and go through, and we're just going to call it deferral webinar. Okay. Now I might put in here like maybe I do 2019. No, that's not the right year. 2019 subscription revenue. We'll just call it that. That way it gives us a little bit more detail in terms of what this is actually for. Okay. And of course, batch. Everybody uses test if you're like me. I'm going to go ahead and leave today's date. That's fine. My deferral method says you can start it as early as January, so that's okay. I'm just pretending that I'm really late. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and choose a customer. Oops. So we'll pick the Cantina Cleanup Crew. All right. And we're going to put in, I'll just say, we'll say it's $24,000. So maybe I'm getting $2,000 a month from this particular one. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come into my distribution. Right? And by default, it's pulling my sales account, which it should. That's what I've got set up for my default sales. But what's going to happen if I come up to additional, and this is how I access and determine which profile I'm going to use, I'm going to say, well, I want to pick my profile. And it's going to think, apparently, there we go. I'm going to select the one we were just looking at called demo. Okay. Right. So here's my message. This profile is not set up to use, right? Because I've got the wrong account. And that's what it's not happy about, okay? What I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here. I'm going to put in the 24,000. Okay, so now I've got these. And now that I made a change in my profile, Amber, we're going to have to go back and look at that really quick to be sure it didn't mess me up. So I'm going to go ahead and choose deferral profile. I'm going to pick demo. Okay, see, I think it's because I didn't reselect the sales one, but let's double check. Maybe I'm supposed to pick deferral. There we go. That's all I was supposed to do. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and choose what I want to do, my start period, my end period, right? So I'm going to tell it to start January 1. So it's going to backdate. So it's going to post into a previous period, but I haven't closed that period yet, so it's okay. Then I'm going to have my end period be 12/31/19. Okay, I'm doing equal per period. That defaulted for me. It's got my amount of $24,000. Actually, hang on. See, this is supposed to default. See, Amber, I don't think I reselected we're going to save this one. So give me 2 seconds. We're going to look at that deferral profile. I think I forgot to tell it to save on the sales distribution type. So let's go back to financial real quick. We can all blame Amber for that one. I'm just teasing you. So we're going to go back to the deferral profile, and I'm going to pick my demo one. I think when I made that change to include both, yeah, see how it doesn't have sales highlighted anymore? So we're going to go ahead and say use it with the sales one. Okay, so we'll save that. Now let's come back into our transaction. See, even those of us that know how to use this stuff mess up sometimes. Okay, let's choose our transaction that we entered. So we're just going to select this one. And I'm going to come back to my distribution. Okay, so I still have the 24. I'm going to put it back because it was 41,000, right? That's what it was when we were originally in here. So I'm going to say I'm going to choose my profile. I'm going to choose demo. Okay, so here's what it's telling me. Hey, that's not the right account for this deferral. But here's the nice thing. It actually tells me what it should be. Oh, right? We don't see that very often, like, hey, you made a mistake. I think here's what you really meant. So it tells me the account that I should be using. So it is preventing me from messing up my transaction if I'm using this profile. So I say, oh, well, that's easy enough to fix. So let me change this back to my liability account. Okay, so I'm going to change that. We're going to come back and choose which profile I want to use. And this is going to default the settings that we have, so I don't have to enter them by myself every single time. Okay. So you'll notice it's got my recognition and my deferral, so it knows what we wanted it to be. It's got my calculation method because I told it in that deferral profile setup, here's what you should be using. It defaulted my start date, right? So it knew based on my profile, this is when I want it to start. But what I want it to do, I'm going to tell it I want 12 months. All right. Once I do that here, now it's going to say, well, here's all my GL posting. It's going to be 2,000 every month. And I could come in here and enter that description revenue. Just January subscription rev. So I can put it and then I can say, then I want. And oh, notice on mine, I could actually overwrite all of these. I'm not going to. Feb subscription rev. I'm not going to type them all because that's super boring to watch. But I could do that. I can go ahead and type in the description so that this goes to the GL. All right. I'm going to click allocate. All right, that's all I have to do. It didn't change this because this distribution is still going to happen, okay? Now, I don't want you to think I'm like making this up, so I'm going to save this because I do have a transaction that's already posted to these accounts, so I want you to see what it has prior to and then see what it's going to have after. So we're going to go to my summary. Let's go to 41. Oops. Okay, so this is the one because of course we have to test, right? That's our thing. So I was making sure all this stuff worked before we got here, and I've posted there's a $1,250 credit to my revenue account each month. Okay, so that happened automatically. And if I look at my deferral account, I had one for 15, and you'll notice I have a debit to it for that amount. So these numbers are going to change. I have my deferral set up so that when I post the transaction in the receivables module, that it also posts everything into the GL. And since my January isn't technically closed, I still have it open for posting, it is posting back for me. Okay, so let's go back to our transaction. Actually, we're just going to go to our receivables batches and post it because we're done. We don't have to do anything else on it. That one has been completed. So we'll pick our transaction and I'm going to post it. All right, done. So I don't, most of my journals are turned off because, except for the GL one, because I just don't like to waste the paper, but we don't need to see what that journal entry looks like. Okay, let's go back to financial. So that's been posted in my AR module because it is an invoice that my customer is going to be paying me for because they do pay that all up front at the beginning of the year. However, I, on my financial statements, need to be sure that that's spread out across the entire year because I haven't actually earned that revenue. All right, so let's go back into those same accounts. Let's look at our revenue account, 41,000. Should be higher now, right? So now it's getting $32.50 for every month because it was the $12.50 I had before, plus the $2,000 for this particular new transaction that I've posted. So I'm going to get hit per month with that revenue, so it's spread equally throughout that year. And of course, if I go back and look at my deferral account, I have 39 because I had 24 plus 15, and then it's removing it from that account everywhere. So at the end of the year, depending on if this revenue, everything hitting this account is only 12 months, that balance should always be zero by the end of the year because it's no longer a liability. I've earned it all, the year has come to a close, so now it's all going to be included in my actual revenue on my P&L information. So it looks like we have a question. Most people set them up to auto post. You know what? It depends. I think from what I found, and I think this is me as well, if they have other things auto posting, then yes, they do. And it really it becomes more of a habit, right? So if you have things that are automatically posting and you don't often have to double check to be sure that there's not a GL batch that came through receivables for some reason, then you're not going to notice these either. I think where they get to the point where that one setting on the deferral profile setup where you can tell it to not post back to a closed period, that one is almost always no, and it should be because you want to make sure that if you have not produced financials, or if you have produced financials that you've already sent out, and maybe they've already been, everything's been ticked and tied, and everything's been balanced, you don't want to change that one. If the period is still open, right, like I haven't closed January yet because I'm still making sure all my stuff is in and posted, then I'm okay. I wouldn't, however, post back to 2018 if I had already closed my year, first of all, and produced financials, or my auditors were already done with it, those kinds of things. So I think it's dependent on the customer in general, that if they typically auto post, this would be turned on to auto post. If they're a customer that likes to look at every transaction in a GL batch and make sure it's okay before it posts, very likely then these are all going to stop at the GL too. So it's preference. I like to let everything post through, just so that you don't forget to, post things and you're producing financials. So it's really customer specific. Ooh, can you prevent a start date before a date like to stop it from a closed year? That's an interesting thought. I am not sure on that, Amber. I would think what it's going to do is, if it is a closed period, you're not allowing posting anymore, I have a feeling that start date's going to cut. You know how when you're entering just a typical transaction, GP says, hey, you can't post to a closed period. I have a feeling you'll get that same type of scenario, but after this call, I'll close some years that I have in here, and I'll test that, because that's a great question. I'm not really sure if that would happen or not. But it would prevent you from posting if I had that setting on the deferral profile, but I don't know that I don't know if there's a way to stop it from entering a start date that is in a closed period, but I'll try that. That's a good question. Okay. All right, so the example that we kind of walked through was really geared towards the receivables, right? If it's revenue, those kinds of things. This is the exact same process on the payable side. So I'm not necessarily going to walk through it because it's the exact same thing. It's just a payables transaction as opposed to a receivables transaction. So just be aware there's not a difference, just the accounts that you're going to use. Now, one thing I did want to show you, and this is really geared towards, hey, I've already posted some stuff this month and I forgot to set up a profile. Now I need to go back, right? So maybe I need to do something retroactive. So I'm going to expand this so we can see it better. So under the financial transactions, I'm going to scroll down just a little bit. You can do some retroactive, okay? Now, I've also got my deferral posting in here, so if I'm not having it post into future periods for me, this is where I'm going to come in and post those. I had mine all set up. This is also where I can do some voiding if I need to. But if I had an invoice that had already been posted, I'm going to come into sales because we've been picking on sales, so we'll continue to do that. And I'm going to say this one's retroactive. So I'm going to choose a customer. I'm not actually going to post one because I'm pretty sure, not that customer. I don't think they have very many transactions. We'll pick Adam Park because everybody knows them. So if I've got some transactions and say, oh gosh, you know what? This one was supposed to get deferred. Okay. So if I need to go through a process to say this one needs to get deferred, oops, I'm going to put in a batch ID. We'll see if this actually posts because I'm sure it's got the wrong account numbers. All right, so if I select this one and I want to drill down on the document, okay, so I've got receivables and sales. So it's letting me see what that with the distribution look like. But if you notice, this one has the wrong account, right? But from here, if it had my 2400 account on here, so my actual deferred, my liability account, I could still run the deferral on this transaction, even though I already posted it. So if you've got users maybe that you don't want doing this, maybe you don't want them to do the deferrals, maybe that's something that your controller, your accounting manager, whoever it might be, maybe they're doing all of them. You could still have them come through this through the retroactive deferral. So it's going to look for anything that's already been posted. You can choose the transaction and still run it. It's not going to let me because I don't have the right account number, but you do have the ability to do it. So that's another way where you can kind of limit people's security to it. Or maybe, Amber, this might also help in terms of what dates are they using. If you want it to kind of funnel through one person, this is a good way to get it to do that. All right. Well, one other thing before I say that's it, because that's not totally it. I'm going to minimize this. I'm going to come into my, is it under my reports? Yes. So under my reports, I do have deferral reports. I've got some detailed and summary. I've also can look at my setups, but I'm going to do a detailed one. Create a new one. And if you'll notice, I name everything test, because at least then I know when I did it, right? I can do ranges based on document dates, et cetera. I'm not going to do any. We don't have very many in here, so I'm not even going to worry about putting transact or a restriction on it. I'm going to go ahead and print it. All right, it's just going to open up because I told it to go to the screen. So here's what it's doing for me. It's letting me know how certain things are being hit, right? So this is the one I was testing yesterday. You could tell I prepared super early, but it's letting me know it's going to hit 4,100 and how much each month. So this is just giving you a bit of a breakdown. So you can see what the original amount was, how much gets deferred every month. Again, if you wanted to go through this, and this could be a situation where you might say, gosh, I don't want them posting back to January, so maybe I'm just going to double up in February, and then I want the other ones to be equal amounts. This is where you can allow certain people to override amounts. But this is just giving you a breakdown as to what documents were created and how the deferral got spread out throughout the year. And you'll also notice where I've got this is the one where we changed the description. So it does carry that description forward for you. So it's not just a blank one. But there's not tons of reporting on this particular module. But the reason for that is because they're just journal entries, right? So you're looking at all of this information, whether it's on a P&L or a balance sheet, or you're doing trial balances, that's where you're really seeing the information. All right. Now, I know we have this scheduled for now, but that's really all there is to deferrals. It's one of those modules that's always been there. We've always known about it. It's been there for a long time. It's just not used heavily. It's one of those things where people say, oh, I'll just enter an invoice every month for my rent. Well, you don't have to do that. Or I'm going to just enter a transaction every month for whatever else it might be that you pay for the year. You don't have to necessarily do that. People like me, right? I pay for Sirius XM satellite radio in my car. Because, if I'm driving up to the mountains in Colorado, you're not going to get a whole lot of radio stations. So I like to make sure I can listen to something. You have the option to pay your whole year up front. On their side, that's deferred revenue because they haven't provided that experience for the whole month, the year for me yet. They're just doing it month by month. So lots of situations where you could be looking at whether or not I use deferrals. And keeping in mind, there are some pretty significant changes that have happened in terms of contracts and revenue recognition. If you've got some really advanced contracting and revenue recognition type things that you need to look for, that's not really what this is going to do. You're going to be looking more towards a third party, things like Binary Stream that's got a really great product that helps really manage those types of situations. This is for kind of more higher level, generalized type, hey, I just need to defer this revenue over the next 3 months kind of thing, or this expense, and it might more so be on the expense side than the revenue side as well. Any questions before I let everybody go? They get some time back in their day. Does anybody have any other questions that they might have? One thing I do want to mention, if you're not seeing it in any of your menus like I have been navigating through, there's probably a couple reasons. One may just be you don't have security to it. We can certainly help or call your partner. They can help you get that done too. Okay. So I will stay on for a few more minutes just in case people have some questions. If not, you are free to go and enjoy the rest of your Thursday. Please feel free to follow up if anybody's got things they want to talk about one-on-one. What do you do if someone cancels a year-long subscription and asks for a refund? So part of that, Amber, gets into our webinar for next month. But what I would do is I would actually do a credit memo that's going to have whatever the remaining amount of that subscription or whatever it may be. So let's say they have half of it that they've canceled out of, and we're going to be nice enough to let them out of it. I would do a credit memo that starts, whenever that 6-month mark is, and have, so let's say we did our invoice for 24 months or for 24,000. I do a credit memo for 12. Have it start maybe on July 1st, so it gets through 6 months, and have it spread through the end of the year. So you're going to have the opposite effect. It's going to net those out in the general ledger. So I wouldn't necessarily void something, right? Because you still want to have that audit trail, but I would do a credit memo that shows it because I'm still doing that credit in receivables, and it's still going to be, and I'd probably want to make sure that I have one for the credit memo distribution type as opposed to the sales, and have it use the same accounts. That way it just kind of nets each other out a little bit, but that'll get you, I can defer credit memo, yes. Because it's part of receivables management. I just have to make sure I use the right distribution type for it. And that way you're seeing both the in and the out, so you have the appropriate audit trail. But that's what I would suggest doing, because then that credit memo will also reduce that customer's account for you, so that it doesn't look like there's supposed to be a payment due. Now, if they've already paid for it all, right, and we need to refund their money, Belinda's going to talk to you about scheduled payments and refund checks next month. So you'll be able to see, hey, now I have a credit memo for them, but I don't really have anything to apply it to, so I need to give them the money back, right? So I can have the credit memo in, let it do its deferral method, and then I'm going to go through the refund checks process to make that customer a vendor. And Belinda's actually going to has a webinar scheduled next month, I believe on the 28th. You probably, if you got an email on this one, you probably got an email on that one, but she'll walk through that process for you as well. All right, anything else? She is covering customer vendor consolidation, because you kind of have to have that in order to do a refund check, right? So if I do, if I have, if the customer I use was, the cantina cleaning crew, well, in order for me to send them a check, they then have to become a vendor, right? So we go through that. So you do look at the customer vendor consolidation as well. And then the refund checks just is in terms of, do you want them to actually do the whole refund check process? So, but I will remind her, thanks Amber, I hate no questions too. I will remind Belinda to make sure she's showing the customer vendor consolidation as well. So no worries. Any other questions? None? All right. Well, then I am done, and I certainly appreciate everybody's time. Hopefully this is helpful. It was one of those modules for me. I'm like, oh yeah, I'll go look at that eventually. But kind of nice to just have somebody walk through it so you have a much better understanding of it. So hopefully it was helpful. And again, if there's anything that you would like to talk on one-on-one, please feel free to let me know. I'm certainly here, and I think everybody's got my contact info. So have a great rest of your day. Thanks so much, everybody.